On the night of my wedding, my husband kissed my forehead and whispered, "I'm exhausted, let's talk tomorrow." I thought he was just tired. But at midnight, I heard a sound I'll never forget, soft moans coming from down the hall. When I followed the noise and opened the door, my world shattered. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. My name is Sarah, and this is the story of how the happiest day of my life became the moment everything I believed in crumbled to dust. It's a story about trust, betrayal, and the devastating realization that sometimes the people closest to us are the ones hiding the darkest secrets. I never imagined that walking down the aisle toward the man I loved would lead me down a path of heartbreak I couldn't have prepared for. But life has a cruel way of teaching us lessons when we least expect them, and mine came on what should have been the most beautiful night of my life. Let me take you back to the beginning, to the moment when everything still felt perfect, when my heart was full of hope and my future seemed bright. My wedding day had been everything I'd dreamed of since I was a little girl. The venue was a beautiful garden estate just outside the city, with white roses climbing up trellises and string lights hanging from ancient oak trees that created a canopy of warm, golden light as the sun set. I wore my grandmother's vintage lace veil, something old that connected me to generations of women in my family who had stood where I stood, making promises to the men they loved. My dress was simple but elegant, fitted at the bodice and flowing into soft layers of silk that moved like water when I walked. I felt like a princess from a fairy tale, and standing at the end of that aisle was my prince, or so I thought. David and I had been together for 3 years before he proposed. We met at a charity fundraiser where he was volunteering, and I was immediately drawn to his warm smile and the way he seemed genuinely interested in making the world a better place. He worked as a financial consultant, but he spent his weekends coaching Little League and helping at the local food bank. He was kind, attentive, and made me feel like I was the most important person in the world whenever we were together. Our relationship progressed naturally. First dates turned into weekend getaways, casual dating turned into moving in together, and eventually, on a quiet Sunday morning while we were making pancakes in our tiny apartment kitchen, he got down on one knee and asked me to be his wife. I didn't hesitate for even a second before saying yes. The wedding planning process had been mostly smooth, though I'll admit there were moments of tension. David's mother, Patricia, was heavily involved in every decision. At first, I appreciated her enthusiasm and took it as a sign that she was excited to welcome me into the family. She insisted on helping choose the venue, the flowers, the menu, even my dress, though I politely declined her input on that last one. There were times when her presence felt overwhelming, when I wished David would establish some boundaries and remind his mother that this was our wedding, not hers. But he would just smile and say, "She means well, Sarah. She's just excited. I'm her only son, and she wants everything to be perfect for us." So I swallowed my discomfort and told myself that having an involved mother-in-law was better than having one who didn't care at all. Looking back now, I can see the signs I missed. The way Patricia would sometimes look at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, not quite disapproval, but not quite acceptance either. The way she and David would sometimes exchange glances during wedding planning meetings, silent communications that excluded me from conversations happening right in front of me. The way she insisted on booking the honeymoon suite at the venue for herself, claiming she wanted to be nearby in case we needed anything, even though I thought it was strange that a mother would want to stay so close to her son on his wedding night. But I dismissed these concerns as pre-wedding jitters, as the natural anxiety that comes with merging two families and two lives into one. The ceremony itself was beautiful. I walked down the aisle on my father's arm, tears streaming down my face as I saw David standing at the altar, looking handsome in his navy suit with a boutonniere of white roses pinned to his lapel. His eyes were glistening too, and when my father placed my hand in his, I felt a surge of love so powerful it took my breath away. We exchanged vows we had written ourselves, promising to love each other through sickness and health, through joy and sorrow, through all the challenges life would throw at us. When the officiant pronounced us husband and wife and David leaned in to kiss me, I heard our guests erupt in applause and I thought, this is it. This is the beginning of forever. If only I had known how short forever would turn out to be. The reception was a blur of happiness, dancing with my father to our song, cutting the cake while David smeared frosting on my nose and I laughed so hard I nearly cried, toasting with champagne while our friends and family shared embarrassing stories and heartfelt wishes for our future. Patricia gave a speech that seemed lovely on the surface, talking about how she had raised David to be a good man and how she hoped he would find a partner worthy of him. At the time, I took it as a compliment, as her way of saying she approved of me. Now, those words echo differently in my mind, and I wonder what she really meant by worthy. As the night wore on, I noticed David seemed distracted. He kept checking his phone, which I found odd since it was our wedding day, and I assumed he would want to be fully present. When I asked him about it, he just kissed my cheek and said he was coordinating some surprise he had planned for later. I smiled and let it go, assuming he had arranged for fireworks or some other romantic gesture to end the night. Around 11 o'clock, as the last guests were saying their goodbyes and the venue staff began cleaning up, David suggested we head to our room. We were staying in the bridal suite at the estate, a luxurious space with a four-poster bed, a fireplace, and French doors that opened onto a private balcony overlooking the gardens. We walked hand in hand through the quiet hallways, and I remember feeling so content, so complete. When we reached our door, David scooped me up in his arms to carry me over the threshold, and I giggled as he nearly dropped me trying to turn the doorknob. Once inside, he set me down gently, and immediately his demeanor changed. The playful, romantic energy seemed to drain from him, and he suddenly looked exhausted. He loosened his tie and sat heavily on the edge of the bed, rubbing his temples. "Are you okay?" I asked, concerned. He looked up at me with tired eyes and said, "I'm sorry, Sarah. I'm just completely drained. It's been such a long day, and I think the stress and excitement finally caught up with me. Would you be terribly disappointed if we just went to sleep? We can start our honeymoon properly tomorrow morning, I promise." I'll admit, I was disappointed. Like most brides, I had imagined our wedding night would be romantic and intimate, a celebration of our new marriage in the most physical way. But I also understood that weddings are exhausting, and the last thing I wanted was for either of us to go through the motions when we were too tired to really be present. So I smiled and kissed his forehead, telling him it was fine, that we had the rest of our lives to celebrate. He looked relieved and immediately began getting ready for bed. Within 15 minutes, he was under the covers, his breathing deep and steady. I changed into the silk nightgown I had bought specifically for this night, feeling a pang of sadness as I hung my wedding dress carefully in the closet and then climbed into bed beside my new husband. But I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing with the events of the day, replaying moments and conversations, thinking about our future and all the adventures we would have together. I lay there in the dark, listening to David's rhythmic breathing, feeling the warmth of his body next to mine, and trying to will myself to relax. That's when I heard it, a sound so faint at first that I thought I was imagining it. It was coming from somewhere down the hall, muffled but unmistakable. At first, I couldn't identify what it was, but as I lay there in the silence, straining to hear, the sound became clearer. It was moaning, soft, breathy, intimate moaning. The kind of sound that could only mean one thing. My heart began to race. Who could possibly be making that noise? We were on a private wing of the estate, with only our room and the honeymoon suite that Patricia had insisted on booking at the far end of the hall. Surely it couldn't be coming from there. Surely my mother-in-law wasn't. No, that was ridiculous. But the sound persisted, growing slightly louder, and with it came other noises, the rhythmic creaking of bed springs, low murmurs, the unmistakable sounds of passion. I felt my face flush with embarrassment and discomfort. Whether it was Patricia or someone else, I didn't want to be lying awake listening to this. I glanced at David, still sleeping peacefully beside me, and felt a mix of emotions I couldn't quite process. Part of me wanted to wake him and ask him what we should do, but another part of me felt foolish for even caring. So, what if someone else was having sex in a nearby room? Why should that bother me? Yet something about it felt wrong, felt off in a way I couldn't articulate. Maybe it was just my disappointment at our own uneventful wedding night making me hyper-aware of others' activity. Maybe I was being irrational, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The sounds continued, and despite my better judgment, I found myself slipping out of bed. I told myself I was just going to get a glass of water from the hallway fountain, that I wasn't actually going to investigate, but my feet seemed to have other plans. I tiptoed to our door and opened it as quietly as possible, wincing as it creaked slightly on its hinges. The hallway was dimly lit by wall sconces that cast long shadows across the carpeted floor. I stood there for a moment, my silk nightgown offering little protection against the chill in the air, and listened. The sounds were definitely coming from the direction of the honeymoon suite. I shouldn't have walked toward it. I should have gone back to bed, cuddled up next to my sleeping husband, and forced myself to forget what I was hearing. But something compelled me forward, some instinct I didn't understand pulling me down that hallway like a magnet. As I got closer to the door, the sounds became more distinct. There was definitely a woman's voice, breathy and pleasured, and beneath it, a man's deeper groans. I felt sick to my stomach. Was this really Patricia? Had my mother-in-law brought some man to our wedding venue to sleep with him while David and I were just down the hall? The thought was mortifying and invasive, and I felt anger rising in my chest. But then I heard something that made my blood run cold. The woman's voice, in a moment of passion, gasped out a name. "David," she moaned. "Oh God, David." I stood frozen in the hallway, my hand pressed against my mouth to keep from making any sound. That couldn't be right. I must have misheard. There was no way she had just said my husband's name. But then I heard it again, clearer this time. "David, yes, don't stop." And beneath her voice, the man's response, muffled but distinct. "Patricia, you feel so good." The world tilted sideways. My vision blurred and my knees buckled, and I had to press my hand against the wall to keep from collapsing. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. My husband was asleep in our bed. I had just left him there. But even as my mind tried to rationalize what I was hearing, my heart knew the truth. I thought about how quickly he had fallen asleep, how exhausted he claimed to be, how he had checked his phone all night. I thought about the glances he and Patricia had exchanged during the wedding planning, the way she had insisted on being so close to us on our wedding night. And suddenly, horribly, everything made sense. My hand moved to the doorknob as if it had a will of its own. I knew I shouldn't open that door. I knew that whatever I saw on the other side would destroy me. But I had to know. I had to see with my own eyes what my heart was already screaming at me was true. So I turned the knob, slowly, silently, and pushed the door open just enough to peer inside. The room was lit only by candles, their flickering light casting dancing shadows across the walls. And there, on the bed, tangled in white sheets that looked eerily similar to the ones in our bridal suite, were two naked bodies moving together in perfect rhythm. It took my eyes a moment to adjust, a moment to fully comprehend what I was seeing, and in that moment I prayed I was wrong. I prayed it was strangers, that David and Patricia were somehow common names, and this was all a terrible coincidence. But then the man shifted, and the candlelight fell across his face, and I saw features I had kissed goodbye less than an hour ago. Dark hair, strong jaw, that small scar above his left eyebrow from a childhood accident. It was David. My husband of barely 4 hours. And beneath him, her hands gripping his back, her legs wrapped around his waist, was Patricia, his mother, her face contorted in pleasure I had never seen her express at any family dinner or holiday gathering. I must have made a sound, a gasp, a sob, something, because they both froze. David's head whipped toward the door, and his eyes locked with mine. For a moment, we all just stared at each other, frozen in a tableau of horror. Then everything happened at once. Patricia screamed and grabbed for the sheets to cover herself. David scrambled off the bed, his face cycling through expressions so rapidly I couldn't keep track. Shock, fear, guilt, anger. And I just stood there, my hand still on the doorknob, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to do anything but watch my entire world collapse around me. Sarah, David said, his voice strangled and desperate. He was trying to wrap a sheet around his waist, stumbling over his own feet as he moved toward me. Sarah, wait, I can explain. But there was nothing to explain. What explanation could possibly make sense of what I had just witnessed? What words could undo the image now seared permanently into my brain? I took a step backward, then another, and then I was running. I ran back down the hallway, my silk nightgown billowing behind me, my bare feet silent on the carpet. Behind me, I could hear David calling my name, but I didn't stop, didn't slow down, didn't look back. I burst back into the bridal suite and slammed the door behind me, locking it with shaking hands. My chest was heaving, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst right through my ribcage. I looked around the room, at the rose petals scattered across the bed, at my wedding dress hanging in the closet, at the champagne sitting in an ice bucket that had long since melted, and I felt a scream building in my throat. This room, this beautiful room that should have been the setting for the beginning of my marriage, now felt like a tomb, a memorial to dreams that had died before they even had a chance to live. There was pounding on the door. Sarah, please, David's voice came through, muffled and desperate. Please open the door. Let me explain. It's not what you think. Not what I think. What else could it possibly be? I had seen them. I had heard them. There was no ambiguity here, no room for misinterpretation. My husband had left me alone on our wedding night to sleep with his mother. The sentence was so absurd, so beyond the realm of anything I could have imagined, that for a moment I wondered if I was having some kind of psychotic break. Maybe I was still asleep, trapped in the world's worst nightmare, and any second now I would wake up to find David beside me and laugh at the ridiculous places my unconscious mind had wandered. But I wasn't asleep. This was real. Horrifyingly, devastatingly real. The pounding on the door continued, accompanied now by Patricia's voice. Sarah, darling, please be reasonable. Let us talk to you. This is all a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. She was calling incest a misunderstanding. I felt bile rise in my throat and barely made it to the bathroom before I vomited, my body rejecting the horror my mind was trying to process. I knelt on the cold tile floor, my silk nightgown pooling around me, and I wept. Great, heaving sobs that shook my entire body and seemed to come from somewhere deep in my soul. How long had this been going on? That was the question that kept circling in my mind as I sat there on the bathroom floor. Was this a recent development, or had it been happening all along? I thought about every family dinner I had attended, every holiday gathering, every casual Sunday brunch. Had they been sleeping together the whole time? When David and I were dating, was he also sleeping with his mother? When he proposed to me, when he promised to forsake all others, did he know he was lying? Or was our wedding night somehow the catalyst, some twisted consummation of a relationship that should never have existed? I don't know how long I sat there before the pounding on the door finally stopped. Eventually, I heard whispered conversation in the hallway, David's voice low and urgent, Patricia's responding in tones I couldn't quite make out. Then footsteps retreating and finally silence. I pulled myself up using the edge of the sink, avoiding my reflection in the mirror because I couldn't bear to see the woman I had become, the woman who had been so thoroughly betrayed on what should have been the happiest night of her life. I walked back into the bedroom and looked at my phone on the nightstand. It was almost 2 a.m. In less than 12 hours, I would have been married for half a day. Instead, I was, what? Still married. Technically, though the marriage had never been consummated. At least not between David and me. The thought made me laugh, a harsh, bitter sound that echoed in the empty room. I picked up my phone with trembling hands and scrolled through my contacts, wondering who I could possibly call at this hour, who I could tell about this nightmare that had become my reality. My parents? They would be devastated. My best friend? She would want to kill David. The police? I wasn't even sure if what had happened was illegal, though it certainly felt like it should be. In the end, I called no one. I sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing my silk nightgown, and stared at the wall as the candles burned down and the first light of dawn began to creep through the French doors. I tried to make sense of what had happened, tried to understand how I had ended up here. Had there been more signs I missed? Were there moments when I should have known something was wrong? I replayed our entire relationship in my mind, searching for clues, for red flags, for anything that might have warned me about the horror waiting at the end of the aisle. As the sun rose, casting golden light across the room that should have been filled with joy, I came to a decision. I wasn't going to hide what had happened. I wasn't going to protect David or Patricia from the consequences of their actions. They had humiliated me, betrayed me, violated every trust and vow that should exist between people who claim to love each other. And they were going to face the truth of what they had done. I got dressed mechanically, pulling on jeans and a sweater, packing my belongings into the suitcase I had brought for our honeymoon. I folded my wedding dress carefully, though part of me wanted to tear it to shreds, and placed it in its garment bag. When I was done, I stood in the doorway of the bridal suite and took one last look at the room where my marriage had both begun and ended in the span of a few hours. Then I picked up my bags and walked out, pulling the door closed behind me with a soft click of finality. The hallway was empty, and for that I was grateful. I didn't know if David and Patricia were still in the honeymoon suite, or if they had slunk away in shame once they realized I wasn't going to open my door. I didn't care. I walked past their door without slowing down, my head held high despite the tears streaming down my face. I made my way through the quiet estate, past staff who were beginning to set up for breakfast, past the gardens where just hours ago I had promised to love David forever. My car was in the parking lot, and I threw my bags in the trunk with more force than necessary, the physical act of hurling luggage providing a small release for the rage building in my chest. Then I got in the driver's seat, started the engine, and drove away from the venue without looking back. I went to my parents' house because I had nowhere else to go. When my mother answered the door in her bathrobe, her face still sleepy and confused, and saw me standing there with my suitcases and my tear-stained face, she knew immediately that something terrible had happened. "Oh, honey," she said, pulling me into her arms, and I broke down completely. I told her everything, the words tumbling out in a rush of pain and disbelief. I watched her face cycle through the same emotions I had felt: shock, denial, disgust, rage. My father came downstairs mid-story, and I had to repeat it all, watching his expression harden with fury. "That sick son of a bitch," he kept saying, pacing the living room like a caged animal. "That sick, twisted son of a bitch." Within hours, everyone knew. My parents called my siblings, who called my aunts and uncles, who called their friends. David's father, who had divorced Patricia years ago, called me personally to apologize and to tell me he had always suspected something was wrong with her relationship with David but had been dismissed as crazy and vindictive. Friends from the wedding started reaching out, having heard rumors, wanting to know if it was true. And through it all, my phone kept buzzing with messages from David. At first they were desperate apologies, then angry justifications, then pathetic pleas for me to understand that what he and Patricia had was complicated and not what it looked like, despite being exactly what it looked like. I blocked his number after he sent me a 30-minute voice message trying to explain that their relationship had started when he was 18 and she had been going through a difficult divorce, as if that made it better rather than infinitely worse. I filed for an annulment the following week. My lawyer assured me that grounds for annulment included fraud, and lying about the nature of your relationship with your mother definitely counted as fraud. David didn't contest it. I think he knew he had no leg to stand on, no argument that would make any court sympathetic to his position. The annulment was granted within 60 days, and just like that, my marriage was erased from legal existence as if it had never happened. But I couldn't erase it from my memory. I couldn't unsee what I had seen, unhear what I had heard. For months afterward, I had nightmares. I would wake up gasping, the image of them together still burning behind my eyelids. I went to therapy, spending hours on a couch talking to a kind woman with gentle eyes who helped me understand that what had happened to me was a profound betrayal, but not a reflection of my worth. She helped me see that I had done nothing wrong, that there was no way I could have predicted or prevented what David and Patricia had done. She helped me work through my anger, my shame, my fear that I would never be able to trust anyone again. The story made it into the local news, though the details were vague enough to protect identities. Still, Everyone in our social circle knew who it was about, and both David and Patricia became pariahs overnight. Patricia lost her position on several charitable boards. David was quietly asked to leave his firm, his professional reputation destroyed beyond repair. They moved away eventually, together I heard, to a different state where no one knew their history. The thought of them starting over somewhere else, pretending to be a normal couple, made me physically ill. But it was no longer my problem. I had to let it go if I wanted to heal. It took time, more time than I expected, but slowly I began to rebuild my life. I changed jobs, moved to a new city, made new friends who only knew me as Sarah, not as that poor woman whose husband slept with his mother on their wedding night. I started dating again, though I was cautious, guarded in ways I had never been before. I told my therapist I felt like I was wearing armor, and she said that was okay, that armor was useful as long as it didn't become a prison. Eventually, I met someone new, someone kind and patient who listened to my story without judgment and gave me space to heal at my own pace. We took things slowly, building trust brick by brick, and though I still had moments of fear, moments when old trauma would rear its ugly head, I was learning to believe in love again. 3 years have passed since that night. 3 years since I discovered the worst betrayal imaginable. And while the pain has dulled, while I've moved forward with my life, I still carry the scars. I still have moments where I wonder how I missed the signs, where I question my own judgment and instincts. But I've also learned that some things are simply unknowable, that some people are so skilled at deception that no amount of vigilance would have exposed them. David and Patricia created a lie so profound, so carefully constructed, that it fooled everyone who knew them, not just me. And while that doesn't excuse what they did, it does help me understand that I couldn't have prevented it. If there's any lesson to be learned from my story, any wisdom I can offer to others, it's this: trust your instincts. When something feels wrong, even if you can't articulate why, pay attention. Don't dismiss your concerns as paranoia or pre-wedding jitters or anything else. Listen to that small voice inside you that knows when things aren't right. And know that if you do find yourself betrayed, if you discover that the person you loved was not who you thought they were, you can survive it. You can heal. You can love again. It won't be easy, and it won't be quick, but you're stronger than you know. As for David and Patricia, I don't know where they are now, and I don't care. They made their choices, and they have to live with the consequences. I hope they understand the damage they caused, the pain they inflicted, though I suspect they're more concerned with their own comfort than with the wreckage they left behind. But that's not my burden to carry anymore. I've set it down, and I've walked away, and I'm building a life filled with genuine love, real trust, and the knowledge that I deserve better than what they gave me. My wedding night will always be the worst night of my life, the moment when my world shattered into a million pieces. But it also became the catalyst for change, the push I needed to demand more from my relationships and from myself. In a twisted way, David and Patricia did me a favor. They showed me exactly what I don't want, what I won't tolerate, what I refuse to accept. And in doing so, they cleared the path for me to find what I actually deserve. So here I am, 3 years later, sharing my story with you. Not because I want pity, and not because I haven't moved on, but because I know there are others out there who have experienced betrayal in its many forms, who feel like they'll never recover, who wonder if they can ever trust again. And I want them to know that they can, that the pain won't last forever, that on the other side of heartbreak is a life worth living, filled with people worth loving. My story doesn't have a fairy tale ending, but it has something better. A real ending, where I chose myself, where I refused to accept crumbs of love and respect, where I walked away from toxicity and toward healing. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever trusted someone only to discover the truth too late? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, if it helped you feel less alone in your own pain, please consider sharing it. You never know who might need to hear that they can survive their worst nightmare too. Thank you for listening to my story, for bearing witness to my pain and my healing. And remember, you deserve love that is honest, faithful, and true. Never settle for anything less.